The generator cut out at 11:23 p.m., about 40 minutes after Clara told me she'd never once thought of me that way. Which would have been easier to believe if she hadn't been sitting 3 inches away from me on the hearthrug, wearing my flannel shirt over her pajama top, and studying the side of my face like she was trying to memorize something she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. My name is Milo Decker. I was 31, a landscape architect based out of Toronto, and I'd spent most of the past 18 months building a quiet life around not reaching for things I wasn't sure I could keep. That included my own emotions, most of my weekend plans, and especially Clara. Clara had been my best friend for 6 years. She was 29, a freelance graphic designer who worked from a 2-bedroom apartment in the annex that smelled permanently of ink and cold coffee, who kept a succulent she'd named Basil on her windowsill and talked to it without irony, who laughed at her own jokes before she'd finished telling them and made that charming instead of annoying somehow. We weren't supposed to be alone at the cottage. The plan had been a long weekend in Muskoka. 6 friends, 2 cars, the kind of trip that looks effortless on paper and requires 4 months of group chat chaos to actually arrange. Thanksgiving weekend, lake views, someone's coworker's rental property, paddle boards if the weather held, board games, and too much wine if it didn't. Then, Henrik and Steph got into something the week before and needed to work through it privately. My friend Tom's kid came down with something, and he couldn't get away. Hamish's mum had a fall and he drove up to Sudbury to be with her. And Maya, who had organized the entire reservation, texted at 6 in the morning on Saturday. "So sorry, got called in, don't hate me, I'll e-transfer you my share." Followed immediately by a string of maple leaf emojis that I think were intended to be apologetic. By 7 a.m. it was just me and Clara. I should have canceled. She should have canceled. There was no sensible reason for 2 people to drive 3 hours north to share a 6-person rental that cost $800 a weekend. Instead, she appeared at my door in Roncesvalles at 8 sharp in a burnt orange sweater and her old hiking boots, carrying 2 large Timmies and a paper bag of Timbits. She held up both cups. "We paid the deposit and I already told Basil we'd be gone. He's expecting privacy." Basil's a succulent. Basil has an inner life. She handed me my double-double. "Grab your bag. The 400's going to be a disaster after 9. That was how it started. Stupidly, warmly, over 2 coffees and a bag of glazed donuts while the city was still quiet. We left before the highway got bad, and by the time the trees along the roadside had turned into something out of a group of 7 painting. Burning orange and deep red against a gray October sky. I'd almost forgotten every reason I'd been careful. Almost. The cottage was 40 minutes past Huntsville, down a gravel road, through birch trees, right on the edge of a lake that caught the clouds at the surface like a mirror. It was smaller than the listing photos suggested. There was a wraparound porch, a stone fireplace, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the mid-90s, and mismatched chairs around a pine table that wobbled on one leg. I carried the cooler in, while Clara did a loop of the property, which was her habit everywhere she went. "Oh," she called from down the hall. I set the cooler down. "What?" She appeared in the doorway, her expression caught between apologetic and amused. "The pull-out sofa." I followed her to the living room. The pull-out had already been extended. The mattress concave in the middle, with a spring visible through a hole in the fabric, roughly the size of a loonie. We stared at it. "That's not a couch," I said. "That's a structural complaint. The bedroom has a queen. I'll take this one." She turned to look at me the way she always did when I was being unnecessarily self-sacrificing, fond and exasperated in equal measure. "Milo, we're adults. We can share a bed without turning it into a referendum." "I'm not turning it into anything." "You're doing the face." "I don't have a face." "You have 14 distinct faces and I've cataloged all of them. That one's noble suffering, which I find both touching and completely unnecessary." She patted my arm. "Right side or left?" I cleared my throat. "Right." She smiled, brief and soft. "There it is." We unpacked groceries and made butternut squash soup from scratch because Clara had arrived with an alarming quantity of spices and a personal philosophy about autumn cooking. We ate at the kitchen table while the sun dropped behind the tree line and turned the lake's surface copper and then dark. The cottage had that particular stillness that places far from the city carry. Not silence, but a different sound. Wind through pines. A loon calling somewhere out on the water. Clara kicked my ankle under the table. "If we were a couple," she said, "this is where I'd complain that you didn't let me season it. You seasoned it 4 times while my back was turned. That's called layering. You put cumin in butternut squash soup. I put cumin in everything. It's a lifestyle." She leaned back in her chair, hands wrapped around her bowl. "You know what your problem is? Apparently cumin. You look for the catch in things. Like right now, this is nice. We're in a beautiful cottage. The soup is excellent. It's snowing a little outside, and you're somewhere in your head calculating what it's going to cost you." I looked down at my bowl. "My ex used to say something like that," I said, after a moment. The table went quiet, not uncomfortably, just in the way that happens when something real gets dropped into a conversation. "Nina?" Clara asked. "Yeah." I turned my spoon over. She said I treated everything like it had a hidden fee. Like I was always trying to calculate what something was going to take before I let myself have it. Was she right? Probably. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's a difference between being careful and being afraid. The first one makes sense. The second one's just expensive." Expensive. In the currency of things you could have had. She shrugged one shoulder. "I'm a designer. I think about the cost of defaulting to the safe option a lot." I looked at her then, the way the lamp caught her hair, the way she was watching me with that quality of attention she had, the kind that didn't rush to fill quiet with something easier. 6 years of knowing her, and I still wasn't entirely used to being seen that carefully. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think steady has value. People just don't always know what to do with it." I almost said something then. I don't know exactly what. Something that would have started small and ended up somewhere I hadn't planned to go. Then the generator gave one decisive clunk from the back of the cottage, and every light in the building went out. We sat in the dark for a second. "Was that supposed to happen?" Clara said. The generator was a propane unit bolted to the side of the building, and it had, as far as I could tell with a flashlight and increasing frustration, decided it was done for the evening. The manual, in a Ziploc bag inside the back door, described the problem cheerfully and offered no solutions that didn't involve a part I didn't have and a phone call I couldn't make on 1 bar of signal. When I came back inside, Clara had found candles in the kitchen drawer and arranged them on every flat surface in the main room. She was crouched by the fireplace feeding birch logs in, and the room had already gone warm and amber and small. "Good news," she said. "Wood's dry. Bad news is no power until morning, and it's going to 3 tonight." 3 Celsius. 3 Celsius. She absorbed this. "Right, so we're not in danger. We're just going to be very honest with each other." "Why honest?" She waved a hand. "Cold does that. It strips things down." I brought the wool throw from the couch arm, and we both ended up on the floor in front of the fire. Outside the windows, the lake had disappeared into the dark. Clara had her knees pulled to her chest, her shoulder a few inches from mine, her eyes on the flames. After a while she said, "Can I ask you something?" "You always ask first. It's never actually optional." "Have you ever?" She started again. "Have you ever wondered about us?" There are questions that arrive quietly, wearing the ordinary clothes of a normal evening, and then land like something that's been falling for a long time and finally hit the ground. I looked at the fire. "Clara, that's not an answer. It's your name." "Very good. You do know me." She turned her head, and in the firelight her expression was open in a way that cost her something. Before I could speak, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She reached for it, glanced at the screen. Something shifted in her face, a small involuntary tightening I'd learned over 6 years to recognize as her version of panic. She moved to silence it. She was a half-second too slow. Maya's voice came through the speaker, clear as anything in the quiet cottage. "Okay, so I know you hate when I push, but I need you to hear me. Tell him. You have been in love with Milo for 2 years. And at some point, it stops being patience and starts being self-punishment, Clara. He's not going to figure it out on his own. He's an architect, not a mind reader, and even architects need the plans handed to them sometimes. Clara grabbed the phone and killed the playback. The fire cracked between us. The loon called again, far out on the water. She didn't look at me. I didn't look at her. After a long moment, she said very quietly, "How much of that?" "All of it." She exhaled, the kind of exhale that was trying very hard to be composed. I had 6 years of watching her face. 6 years of seeing something in it and explaining it away, reassigning it, calling it friendship and letting that stand. Because friendship was something I knew I couldn't lose. And right now I was watching her do the same thing I'd been doing. The math of risk. The calculation of what it would cost to be honest versus what it would cost not to be. I stood up and walked to the window. The dark outside was absolute. "Milo," she said. Her voice was careful, in the particular way of someone who has been genuinely brave and immediately regrets it. "Please don't do the kind voice. I'd rather you just." "I don't have a kind voice." "You have a very kind voice. You used it on a woman at Hamish's birthday party when she asked if you wanted to dance." I turned around. I did want to dance. "Then, why didn't you?" I held her gaze across the candlelit room. "Because you were there in the yellow dress, and I'd spent half the night telling myself not to ask you, and by the time she walked over, I'd already decided there was only one person I wanted to be near that night. So I said no to her because saying yes felt like giving up on something I wasn't ready to name yet." Clara went very still. The fire gave a soft pop. "That was 8 months ago," she said. "I know. You remember the dress." "Clara, I remember things I have absolutely no practical reason to remember." The panic in her expression didn't disappear. It changed, shifted into something more layered, the way real feelings do when they've been kept private long enough to develop texture. She looked almost angry, almost wondering, both. "How long?" she asked. I crossed back to the hearth and sat down beside her, close enough that our knees nearly touched. "Do you want the honest version or the version where I seem less honest?" I rubbed the back of my neck. "The night after Nina and I ended things, you showed up with boxes and pad thai and said we were dismantling beige from my life. I was standing in my kitchen, trying to figure out how you reorganize the inside of yourself after something like that, and I heard you laughing at something in the hall before you knocked." I stopped. And I thought, she's about to come through that door, and it's going to be okay. And then I thought, when did she become the person I count on for that? Clara's breath caught, very small. "That was the same week I told Maya," she said quietly. 2 years ago. After I drove home that night, I called her and said I thought I was in love with you, and I didn't know what to do about it. We sat with that for a moment. 2 years. The weight of it was not crushing. It was more like the weight of something carried quietly for a long time and finally set down somewhere it could rest. "I was scared," I said. "You were the person I called when anything went wrong, the person I wanted to tell everything to. If I said something and it went badly, I'd lose the one person I couldn't afford to lose." She turned toward me, and her voice was gentle and a little fierce at the same time. "So you decided for me that the risk wasn't worth it." "Yeah. That's very considerate and very stupid." "I know. You can't protect someone by keeping them in the dark, Milo. That's just fear wearing a generous coat." I laughed low and helpless. "You're right. I know I am." She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't pulling away either. "I'm cold and I've been carrying this for 2 years, but I'm right." I looked at her then. The small scar through her left eyebrow from a bike incident in Kensington Market. In the first month we knew each other, the way her hands were curled in her lap like she was holding herself together, the way the candlelight caught copper in her hair. I reached over and covered her hands with mine. She looked down, then up. Her fingers uncurled and slid through mine, cold at first, then gripping gently. We sat like that while the fire settled and the candles burned shorter. After a while, she leaned her head against my shoulder. I put my arm around her because the room was cold, and because I'd wanted to for longer than I'd admitted, and because I was tired of being careful in ways that cost me things I actually wanted. "What do we do now?" she asked. "I don't know exactly, but I'd like to figure it out." "Very architect of you. Assess the site before breaking ground." "Is that a complaint?" She was quiet for a moment. "No." Her fingers tightened in mine. "Take your time." The room had gotten genuinely cold by midnight. The fire was still going, but the cottage walls had no insulation worth mentioning, and our breath was faintly visible. We'd layered everything available, and were still losing ground to the temperature. "We need to move to the actual blankets," Clara said. I looked toward the hallway. "The bed, yes, I know." She stood, still wrapped in the wool throw, and looked down at me with an expression that was fond and slightly exasperated. "Milo, we just told each other we've been carrying this for 2 years. I think we can share a duvet." I got up. The bedroom was colder than the main room, but the bed had a thick duvet and an extra blanket folded over the footboard. We moved around each other in the semi-dark with the particular awkwardness of two people who know each other very well and are suddenly learning something new about the geography of that knowledge. Trading off the bathroom, finding our respective sides, doing the small choreography of a first time that isn't really a first time at all. When I came back, Clara was already under the duvet, with her hair loose over the pillow, reading something on her phone on the last flicker of battery. She looked up. "You can get in." I climbed in on the right side, left a careful space. She looked at the space, then at me. "I confess 2 years' worth of feelings tonight, and you're treating this like a formal deposition." "I'm trying to be." "I know, it's very sweet." She reached over and tugged the duvet edge toward her. "Come here." So I did. She settled against me with the ease of someone who had made a decision and meant it, her shoulder under my arm, one hand resting over my chest. I could feel her breathing slow and then gradually steady. "Clara," I said quietly. I meant everything I said." She was quiet for a moment, her hand pressed slightly against my chest. "Me too. I'm not going to change my mind in the morning." "Good." Her voice had gone soft with the edge of sleep. "Because I'm not planning to give you the chance." I smiled at the dark ceiling. Outside the wind had dropped. The lake would be glass. Just before she fell asleep, she said very quietly, "Milo?" "Yeah." "I'm glad the generator broke." "Me too," I said. And she slept, and I lay awake for a long time after, not from anxiety, for once, but from the particular kind of wakefulness that comes from happiness you haven't yet learned how to hold. Morning arrived pale and still, light coming thin through the curtains, the cottage quiet in the way that only happens in October when the birds have started heading south. Clara was asleep against my shoulder, one arm across my ribs. I'd been awake for several minutes, doing nothing more useful than staring at the ceiling and feeling like a person who had accidentally stepped into a version of his life that was better than the one he'd been planning. She woke gradually, the way she always did, in stages, with small sounds. Then she went still. The particular stillness of someone remembering where they are. I waited. She tipped her face up. "Hi," she said. "Hi. That wasn't a dream." "No." She considered this, a slow, uncertain smile. "Okay. Okay. Okay." She pushed up on one elbow. Her hair was an absolute disaster, and she looked more like herself than I'd ever seen her. "Are you going to say something, or are you going to kiss me first?" I reached up and tucked a piece of her hair back. "I've thought about kissing you since Hamish's birthday party," I said. "That's meaningful," she said, "and extremely overdue." So, I kissed her. She made a small sound against my mouth that broke something open in me. Some last wall I'd been maintaining without quite admitting it was load-bearing, and her hand came up to my jaw, and the kiss deepened into something that was not tentative at all. When we finally separated, she rested her forehead against mine. "Hi," she said again. "Hi. I need coffee before anything else happens, or I'll say something I can't walk back." We made coffee in the little percolator in the cottage kitchen, layered in every piece of clothing we'd packed, and stood at the counter eating the last of the Timbits because the table was too cold to sit at. The generator repairman arrived from town at 10. Cheerful, efficient, fixed it in 20 minutes with a part he kept in his truck. When warm air finally pushed through the vents, Clara looked at the heater vent and then at me. "The spell is ending," she said. There was no spell, just old equipment and Maya's voice note. And Timbits. And Timbits. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. "We should probably go home." Probably. Maya's going to be impossible. Maya already knows everything. She's been coaching me for 2 years. Clara set her mug down and leaned against the counter. "She's going to make me give a full debrief." "Let her." I crossed the kitchen to her. "I don't mind." The drive back to Toronto was slow and bright. The 400 backed up past Barrie, with Thanksgiving weekend traffic turning the highway into a long, patient crawl. Clara had her feet up on the dash, a habit I'd long since stopped protesting, and her hand resting in mine on the console. Her phone reconnected somewhere around Newmarket and lit up with approximately 40 messages. She read them aloud, selectively. "Maya, well Hamish, I'm in Sudbury and I'm still refreshing this chat. Henrik, I told Steph I had a feeling about this trip. Maya, Clara, I swear to God." She was laughing. I was keeping my eyes on the road and failing not to smile. She typed something back, then went quiet. "What did you send?" I asked. "Generator broke. 1 bed. He kissed me first. I'm keeping him." I glanced over. "I kissed you first?" "Technically, I kissed you, but you were about to." "That's not the same thing." "It really is." She squeezed my hand. "Is keeping you okay?" I looked back at the highway. Thought about the past 18 months. The careful quiet of it. The life I'd arranged around, not wanting things too visibly. The night Clara had shown up with Thai food, and a plan to repaint my kitchen, and the way I'd felt when I heard her laughing in the hall. "Yeah," I said, "more than okay." What came after wasn't perfect. It was better than that. It was real. We went back to our separate apartments, our routines, the ordinary machinery of our lives, except now something different ran underneath all of it. A different frequency. There was a Tuesday in November when I canceled dinner because a client moved a deadline. And Clara went quiet in that careful way that meant she was hurt and trying to be reasonable about it. I drove to her place in the annex with shawarma from the place on Bloor she liked, and when she opened the door, I said, "I don't want to be the person who assumes you'll understand until one day you stop expecting anything." She looked at me for a moment. Then she opened the door wider. We ate on her floor and made a rule. If one of us was scared, we said so. If one of us felt invisible, we said that too. Love in the practical sense, we were both learning. Wasn't one decision made in a cold cottage in Muskoka. It was 100 smaller ones made in grocery store parking lots and tired weeknight phone calls. And the ordinary Tuesday moments that nobody writes about because they don't look like much from the outside. By March, she had a blue flannel in the closet at my place that was technically mine, but had gradually stopped being mine in any practical sense. I didn't say anything about it. I liked seeing it there. In June, we went back to the cottage. Same gravel road, same birch trees, same wraparound porch. We'd rented it again, just us, on purpose this time. Clara had packed basil. The generator worked perfectly. "Suspicious," she said, standing in the kitchen. "It's a machine. It's not conspiring." Last time it had impeccable timing. I came up behind her and put my arms around her because I could. That was still a new enough discovery to feel remarkable. She leaned back into me and looked out the window at the lake, which was green and full of June light, completely different from the dark October water we'd sat beside 8 months ago. That evening, we took blankets down to the dock and sat until the stars came out, her back against my chest, the lake going quiet in the long northern twilight. "Tell me something you haven't told me," she said. "You ask that every time. Because you always have something." I looked out at the water. "The night after Nina and I ended things, I didn't call you straight away. I drove around for almost 2 hours. Then I parked outside your building and sat in the car for 20 minutes trying to decide whether it was okay to need you that much." She was quiet. "I didn't know then that needing someone that much could be the point," I said. "Not a warning sign, just the thing itself." She turned her face toward mine, and in the fading light, Her expression was the one I'd been noticing for 6 years without letting myself understand what I was seeing. Your turn, I said. She thought for a moment. When you told me about the yellow dress, that you'd wanted to dance with me all night, I went and cried in the bathroom. When? After you fell asleep, happy crying. A pause I didn't want you to see. I pressed my lips to her hair. You can show me next time, I said. She turned in my arms and looked at me with an expression I was still learning the full language of and hoped I'd spend a long time getting it right. Deal, she said. And she kissed me there on the dock, the lake going dark, the first fireflies coming out over the water, and it felt less like beginning something and more like finally arriving, somewhere I'd been trying to find for years, without quite knowing that was what I was doing, which is, I think, the only honest way to end up anywhere worth staying.